If we go back far enough in our family histories, most of us will find that we are related to farmers. I am. The folks that you see up here on the screen are my great-grandparents. On the right is my great-grandfather on the family farm in California showing you his watermelon. And on the left is my great-grandfather at the farm in Illinois. My great-grandparents, and likely the farmers in your families, they lived in a time of transition when we were moving from single-family farms, subsistence farms, where people were largely growing the food that they ate, to a system that is now much more complex. Back then, our great-grandparents and their families had to preserve a lot of the food that they had. It was important that they conserve it, that if they had extra fruits and vegetables that they can it, or if there was extra vegetable matter or bones, that they would put that in stews or make broths out of it. They were producing the food for themselves, so they were very connected to it. But nowadays, we have a disconnect with the food that we consume. If I were to go to a supermarket and I wanted to buy potatoes, there are a lot of things that I don't know about those potatoes. Sure, I can look at the label, I can see maybe the farm that it was grown in or where the potatoes came from, but I don't know how they got here. Did they drive? Did they fly? Did they take a boat? Who was it that pulled this potato out of the ground? How long ago was it harvested? Do I even speak the same language as the person who harvested this potato? If you're like me, you might walk through a field of potatoes and not even realize what was growing beneath your feet. Just in case you're wondering, this is what a field of potatoes looks like. Now, our great-grandparents, they lived in a society where they were growing the food for themselves. And now we live in a society where most of the food is grown by just a few of the people. And this is a good thing. It enables the society that we have. But there's some unintended consequences of all the innovation that has gone into our agricultural and food systems. And one of those consequences is waste. The National Resource Defense Council published a study in 2012, and they reported that fully 40% of the food that is either grown in the United States or that comes into the United States becomes waste. And that stands in stark contrast to another reality in our society, which is that 1 in 6 US families lack the resources that they need to put 6 meals on the table each day. So in their study, the National Resource Defense Council talks about a lot of the different ways that we lose food in our food system. And today I want to share with you a couple of those different ways. Now, what you see here are heirloom tomatoes. If your childhood experience was anything like mine, and you went into a grocery store, you might look at those tomatoes and not realize that they were tomatoes. Some of those even now look kind of like bell peppers to me. As consumers, we've been trained to look for uniformity in our food. When we think of tomatoes, we think of something that is plump. It's bright red. It's almost a perfect sphere, and it's got a nice little green stem at the top. And those expectations of food uniformity can lead to waste, especially when the food that's produced doesn't meet those standards. And that's what happens a lot of the time in our farming industry, is that food that doesn't meet those uniform standards of what consumers are looking for doesn't sell very well. So very often that food will either be weeded out when it's picked, or it will be never picked in the first place. It's better off to just till it into the ground, and that's food that's good to eat, but that doesn't meet those uniform standards. Sometimes we also lose food when the market prices don't support the cost of harvesting the food. If it's too expensive to harvest it, you can't sell it for enough, you lose money. So it makes more sense financially to just till that food back under, and we lose food that way. Another place that we lose a lot of our food is in the transit system. Once we get the food from the farms, we have to get it all over the country, maybe all over the world. And there are problems with keeping the temperatures constant, with making sure that the produce is picked or harvested at the right time so that it's still fresh when it gets to the market. And a lot of food is lost that way. And then of all the food that makes it into retail locations like grocery stores, 20% of that food ends up as waste, either because it expires or it's just, not meeting those standards of uniformity that we're looking for, and we lose that food. We also have this same problem when we look at the food service industry. This is like if you go out to a restaurant, or you're at a catered event, or you're at a hotel, and you're being served food. There's often a mismatch between our portion size and the size of our appetite, and that leftover food just ends up getting scraped into the garbage. Now, I realize for high school students, you may not have this problem. You may not have any difficulty finishing everything that's on your plate. I know I was like that when I was in high school. But as you get older, you may find that that's no longer the case, and we do lose a lot of food this way. There's also a challenge in being able to do anything with food that is already prepared, food that's ready to eat right now. It's hot, it's ready to go, but there's no easy way for us to do anything with it. Maybe give it to the staff, but it's not very easy to donate it. And so a lot of that food also ends up being waste at the food service level. And a final example of how we lose food is in our own homes. I'm certainly guilty of this. I go to the grocery store and I buy more food than I can reasonably consume while that food is still fresh enough to eat. And so as consumers, we also share in this responsibility of the food that we lose. So what do? We can't go back to the farming system that we had before. We have this modern agricultural system that feeds a lot of people, but we still have all of this waste. What can we do about it? What are some people doing about it to reduce the amount of food that we are losing? One of the things that is able to happen is that, in the case of tomatoes, for example, it is possible to take some of the tomatoes that don't meet those standards of uniformity and turn them into tomato sauce or a paste or a puree. So that's one way that we can recover some of that food. Another way that I really like to talk about is something called gleaning. You might be familiar, Phoenix has a strong heritage in citrus farming. And some of the food banks here will organize programs in the spring where people will go and they'll pick the citrus trees in their yards and their neighbors' yards, take that citrus and donate it to food banks. It's called citrus gleaning. And when they do that, the food banks then can provide that to individuals who are in need, or they can send it out for canning or for juicing. And that's another way that they can recover that food. There's also initiatives looking at taking the food that's not consumed in grocery stores and making it accessible to people who are in need. For example, there are programs where people will take produce from grocery stores, put it in high-need neighborhoods, and then sell it at a lower cost to make those fruits and vegetables accessible. The idea of grocery recovery, of taking food that people are not purchasing from grocery stores, is what led to the foundation of the first food bank. The first food bank, of course, was founded here in Phoenix around this idea of grocery recovery and preventing this food from being lost and instead putting it in the hands of people who are in need. Another great way that people are preventing food loss is through the donation of ingredients and refrigerated foods and frozen foods from restaurants, for example. There are many nonprofits that are engaged in transporting these foods to food pantries, and they do that with refrigerated trucks like the ones you see here on the screen. Another need is, as I mentioned, was to be able to rapidly donate perishable foods, foods that are ready to eat right now. And to this end, a team of students at Arizona State and I have developed a method for rapidly recovering this perishable food. We take advantage of the digital networks that are rapidly expanding around us. Access to tablets and smartphones, and even just regular cell phones, can make this kind of rapid coordination possible. If food businesses have leftover food that they want to donate, they can notify us through a mobile application or website. We can dispatch individuals to pick up that food and take it into a community where it is needed, sending messages to the people living near there so that they can come and receive that food donation. We're doing this here in the Phoenix area, and this is our contribution to help address this complex problem. So now we have this food system that has a lot of lost food in it, a lot of waste. But we also have areas where people are innovating. They're coming up with new ideas and ways that they can address this problem, whether it's gleaning from the fields, whether it's doing grocery recovery, whether it's taking food that is rapidly perishable and donating it, or taking ingredients in frozen foods and also donating those. So that brings me to the question that I have for you today, which is, what solutions will you create? There is not likely to be one single solution that can address a problem as complex as food waste or as hunger. But I believe that all of us working together with individual solutions can develop an aggregate that can allow us to adequately address and solve these complex problems. Thank you.